Elizabeth I was put in charge of the problem of the Stargate, and as such she employed several different people. At the head of these individuals, she placed the man on the left who is known as Sir John Dee. And Sir John Dee's helper on this problem was Edward Kelly, the Irish clairvoyant. John Dee, Dr. John Dee, is the creator of Enochian magic. Note that word Enochian because Enoch, of course, is one of the prophets of the Old Testament. But the word Enoch also means the inner eye, or the initiated ones. So Enochian magic is nothing more than the magic of the high ones, the magic of the initiated ones. And through Enochian magic, John Dee believed he could talk to the angels. Now, if we go to the actual book of Enoch, after which the word Enochian comes, the prophet Enoch had this to say in the very opening passage of his book. The words of the blessing of Enoch, wherewith he blessed the elect and righteous, who will be living in the day of tribulation, when all the wicked and the godless are to be removed. And he took up his parable and said, Enoch, a righteous man, whose eyes were opened by God, saw the vision of the Holy One in the heavens, which the angels showed me. And from them I heard everything, and from them I understood as I saw, but not for this generation, but for a remote one, which is for to come. So Enoch is prophesying our times again, the days of tribulation. It turns out that this mysterious master astrologer and court official and ambassador, Sir John Dee, was also the head of MI5, the British Secret Service. It's the first secret service that ever existed. The first secret police existed in Tudor England and was created by John Dee. And when John Dee used to go on occasion to visit the royal houses of other countries, and when he'd write back to his mistress, she who must be obeyed, Elizabeth I, he'd always sign at the bottom of his documents 007. That was the sigil of the head of the MI5 of those days. Now, of course, that is later picked up in the stories of Ian Fleming, and the reason for that is because Ian Fleming himself was a member in more modern times of the British Secret Service. And what better upon retirement than to write about his own organization? So the 007, the original, way back at the time of the Tudor dynasty, was Sir John Dee, master occultist. And if you study the symbol for MI5, you'll notice that it has a triangular pyramidical shape with the crown of the Queen, and it has an eye, the Enochian eye, at the northern apex. Now, John Dee was one of the most powerful black magicians in history. He decided that it would be better to contact pan-dimensional intelligences to solve their little problem of quarantine. Via his system of magic and divination, he succeeded in opening a portal to these fourth-dimensional entities, or oversouls. Dee became a living macroscope. This was not the first time in history where such a forbidden rite was undertaken, and every time it does occur, it has the severest repercussions from history. So John Dee, being a master occultist and connected throughout the world, he looked into this problem and decided that there wasn't any normal technological or scientific way that they were going to be able to find this key, so to speak, to the Stargate. But he said he could use his occult power. So with Edward Kelly and all the other occultists of Europe, in combination, in concert, they decided to call on what are known in the occult world as pan-dimensional oversouls, beings that are above our level of consciousness. Not necessarily more pure or more spiritual, but of a higher spiritual intelligence, let's say, the oversouls. Later writers have called these entities the MacrobeS. This word comes from the fact that there are beings, creatures, entities below us who are called the microbes, and it takes a microscope to see them. Before the advent of the microscope, if anyone had told you that there's all sorts of little creatures and little entities, but you just can't see them, we would have thought they were crazy and probably burned them at the stake as being heretics. But as soon as we have the right instrument, we look through it and we're able to see a whole world, a whole ecostructure of microbes and bacteria and viruses and whatnot. Well, above the level of the human consciousness are the MacrobeS, and as yet there's no instrument per se in order to see it. But there is an instrument, and that instrument is known as the human intuition. It's through the human intuition, the human imagination, that one can make contact with the MacrobeS. John Dee did make contact with the MacrobeS. In fact, he became what might be described as a living macroscope. Now, in short, Dee was told that there were two cardinal premises which needed to be mastered before the Stargate could be opened. The first precept concerned creating matter from energy, but that would have to be revealed in two main stages. And the second concerned the properties of a certain element, and that element was silicon. Now, phase one concerned creating matter from energy, but as the MacrobeS instructed John Dee, the human race was way too primitive for that. That phase one would have to be taught to them in two stages. Part one would be to learn how to do the exact reverse, release energy from matter. And then after that, they would be taught how to create matter from energy. And phase one of that was accomplished on July 16th, 1945, at Alamogordo, or the Trinity experiment, when the atomic bomb was released. So the splitting of the atom was phase A of phase one, being able to release energy from matter. Later on, after that period, from the period of 1945, we would start to see experiments which would work on the rest. So MIT, SRI, Hoover Institute, so on. These organizations are merely fronts for this experimentation, looking at how to now manipulate matter and create it from energy. Phase two was the silicon revolution, the properties of silicon. And of course, we know that silicon is created or is a gateway to the computer age. Silicon makes computing possible. And we're told that technology makes life easier. These are the cover stories that let us buy into some of this stuff. If Grandma can do her shopping on the internet, and we could talk over the internet and buy our VCRs, most people are happy and don't think of any of the occult reasons behind the creations of these powerful instruments.
According to John D. and Edward Kelly, a macrobe, one in particular claiming to be the Archangel Gabriel, told them that when mankind was cast out of the Garden of Eden, they lost their ability to speak their native language, which happened to be of angelic tongue. Hence, they lost their ability to communicate with the animal kingdom. Now, this might be a metaphor which symbolizes man losing his psychic abilities and connections to one another, as well as to animals in nature. The macrobes also seem to believe that the entity known as Korozan seems to be the same as the serpent in the Garden of Eden, the same as Lucifer, who started a war in heaven, causing 1/3 of the angels to be cast out into hell, and then later known as Satan and his horde of demons. Therefore, these Enochian entities back up the story of Adam and Eve. They state that man was once innocent, yet having eaten of the tree of knowledge and being cast out of Eden, man is now cut off from God and in loss of psychic abilities. Now this leaves mankind spiritually corrupt, his judgment unbalanced, and now he's easily corrupted by his lower emotions and impulses. So this Enochian contact, Gabriel, is therefore keeping in the traditions of a faithful angel of Jehovah. He's claiming that Korozan was spiteful of the special relationship between mankind and God. And this demon chose to lead man astray and started a war in heaven over it, hence creating a hell. So at this time we must consider what the Hermetics and the Gnostics and even the Kabbalists point out when they claim that Jehovah lied while the serpent told the truth. Now, as disturbing as that might sound, Jehovah warned that eating the apple would cause certain death. That's what the Bible says. While the serpent said it wouldn't kill you, but it would bring mankind closer to seeing the world as God did, knowing good from evil. So this ultimately led the Gnostics to begin as serpent worshippers. And they presented the serpent in the Garden of Eden as a savior to mankind who was being held hostage by a vengeful and evil God, Jehovah. So the Bible has little to report about the fall of angels. However, the situation is written about in fine detail in the book of Enoch, which might have been purposely left out of the Bible. And I quote, "And it came to pass when the children of men had multiplied, in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters, and the angels, the children of the heavens, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men. And all the others together and with them took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one. And they began to go in unto them and to defile themselves with them. They taught them charms and enchantments and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. And they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. Then the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones."
All right, elsewhere, these giants are described as the union between foreign spirits and mankind. Possessions in like The Exorcist, if you will. The creations of this union are immediately taught by their parents. All manners of occultism, astrology, rituals, magic, herbs, and of course, warfare and mass death. And I continue to quote, "And Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them all the metals of the earth and the art of working them. and bracelets and ornaments and the use of antimony and the beautifying of eyelids and all kinds of costly stones and all coloring tinctures. And there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray, and they became corrupt in all their ways. So they taught them warfare and sex, selling sex, pimping their women out. Continue to quote the Book of Enoch. Simhaza taught enchantments and root cuttings. Armoros, the resolving of enchantments. Barakiel taught astrology. Kokabel taught the constellations. Ezekiel, the knowledge, the clouds. Arakiel, the signs of the earth. Shamsiel, the signs of the sun. And Serial, of course, the moon. And if men perished, they cried, and their cry went up to heaven.
He came up from hell and begat a son of mortal woman. Hail, Satan! Hail, Satan! Satan is his father, and his name is Adrian. He shall overthrow the mighty and lay waste their temples. He shall redeem the despised and wreak vengeance in the name of the burned and the tortured. Hail, Adrian! Hail, Satan! Hail, Satan!
He chose you out of all the world, out of all the women, the whole world. He chose you. He ran these things because he wanted you to be the mother of his only living son.
His power is stronger than stronger. His might shall last longer than longer. Satan!
No! It can't be! No! Look at his hands. His feet!
Oh, God! God is dead! Satan lives! The year is won! The year is won! God is won!
So it is almost ironic that an angel of God who stands against this type of union would allow one of his chief generals, Archangel Gabriel, to essentially connect with mankind in the same way through Enochian magic. So we must be open to the concept that many of these macrobes or Enochian entities are lying. The macrobes are definitely anti-Christ because they firmly state to Kelly and Dee, and which is recorded in Dee's diary. On June the 8th, 1584, Dee states that the spirits attempted to persuade Kelly that Jesus was not God, that no prayer ought to be made to Jesus. Also, they said that there was no sin, and that man's soul doth go from one body to another child's quickening or animation. Along with Archangel Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, an Enochian spirit taking the form of a little girl in a green and red dress calling herself Madame made contact with Kelly and Dee. Her name indicates that she was the spirit of Mars, which is the god of war, because the Hebrew name for this sphere of Mars is Madam. Although she was careful to conceal her true nature from Dee, who actually grew fond of her over time. The most powerful Enochian spirit, although rarely appearing and never speaking directly to the magicians, was the so-called mother of Madame. She would only speak through her so-called children and gave the name of I Am, which, in Moses' account, when he asked God of its name, received a similar answer. I am that which I am.
We're sorry, the number you have dialed is not in service at this time.
Occultists believe that as these elements fulfill their properties by performing a movement infinite times, an electric current is set up. It is out of these ongoing coordinations that a consciousness is formed. The four kingdoms of primary elementals under their angelic kings represent the intelligent action of these four properties. The mind side to the material phenomenon. Such as in nature, a forest or a hill or a beehive. The bee is part of the hive consciousness, and the hive itself can be called the bee angel. These systems consist of repetitions of forces, stresses, and reactions of the environments, where memories are born, which gives rise to the elemental spirits. These are which our ancestors worshipped as devas or nature spirits. Yet first, these elemental spirits begin as children, breaking apart from the system they developed from, and as they develop further, they realize that they will someday cease to exist, because these elemental beings have no divine spark, no soul, because they are creations of the creation, and not creations of the divine creator. So they grow in consciousness until they understand their own mortality and see that they are in fact a lost being. And although they may live many lifetimes when compared to a normal human lifespan, they will one day completely cease to exist because they are soulless. So they seek as initiators those who have souls, humans, which some occultists take on these elemental spirits as students, and hence become the magician's familiar. In return, the elemental spirit will perform services for the magician, being experts of whichever material element that bore them. They have a grasp on scientific knowledge that surpasses our greatest human minds. Such as Edward Kelly and John Dee asked the elemental MacrobeS for the recipe to turn any metal into gold. This has been the dream of every alchemist in the world. These elemental beings possibly even explain how to create energy from matter by splitting an atom later on. Often these human-macrobe relationships turn out for the very worst. At this point, I would like to remind the audience of Hitler, who had the most advanced scientists known to the world. Scientists who the American and Soviet governments sought out, pardoned, and adopted as their own. It has been known and said by many that these scientists achieved their advanced scientific abilities by mixing occult studies with modern science.
It must be understood that elemental macrobes are very much like humans, as in they are constantly evolving in their consciousness. Some are not even intelligent or of a semi-conscious nature, while others are very old, wise, and cunning. As said previously, elemental macrobes are born out of repetitions in nature. This also includes human nature, where repetitions of evil thoughts, deeds can give birth to these demonic elementals in their larva form. These demonic macrobes are the shadows of those who have lived on earth and who have refused all spiritual light, being stuck on greed, materialism, perversions of sex, instead of taking a spiritual path of slowly freeing themselves of material addictions and concerning themselves with that of a higher or more spiritual nature. These unbalanced or evil forces only care about service to themselves, experience through a material world, and will stop at nothing to feed off of occultists or victims the occultist has offered in ritual form. Thus, we arrive at the concept of the demonic entities known as the male incubus and the female succubus, who are elemental beings which prey on individuals while they are asleep. They are known to feed off of sexual energies. Often this is related to sleep paralysis, but there are other explanations for sleep paralysis as well. Though, in regards to the incubus-succubus phenomenon, the elemental macrobe has begun to feed off of a person's sexual energies as they sleep, often causing sexual dreams. And if a person awakes in the midst of this unholy operation, they find themselves paralyzed for a period of time, although they are conscious and awake. Once again, sex and sexual energies are related to the material experience, and for a spiritual being to crave this sort of interaction gives cause that it is a very unbalanced entity. Yet even more imbalanced are the occultists, which set out to feed these demonic macrobes by taking them as their spirit husbands or wives, or even more disturbing, through rituals whereupon victims are sexually or physically traumatized or killed for the payment of these vampire-like beings, knowledge or services.
That's a bulletproof Cyrus. Bulletproof Cyrus. Bulletproof Cyrus. Bulletproof Cyrus.